What if the most powerful spiritual practices are the ordinary day to day ones that we've forgotten how to honor? Hello, my beautiful souls, and a huge warm welcome back. In this episode, I'm joined once again by many time past guest Caitlín Matthews, an internationally renowned author and a teacher of shamanic training programs. Together, we explore what a real living spiritual practice looks like in the midst of modern life. We look at how so many people become porous when they have no spiritual resource to lean into, and how fear grows when all of our trust sits in material safety alone. We also dive into what actually helps in the everyday, from small, repeatable gestures of connection to honest prayer to rooting myth and archetype back into the land beneath our feet so we remain human rather than trying to become gods. This conversation is an invitation to anyone who has longed for a daily practice that feels real, wondered where to begin, or worried that they're somehow not authorized to walk a spiritual path. And before we jump into all of that good stuff, if you've just arrived here, welcome. And if you've come back, welcome home. If you keep finding yourself here without subscribing, your soul clearly knows what it's doing. So honor the pull, go ahead and subscribe. And if you're struggling with the challenges of walking your soul path in this crazy modern world and would benefit from guidance, kinship, and support, come join us in Unio, the community for wild sovereign souls. Unio is the living home for the wild sovereign soul path, where together we reclaim our wildness, actualize our sovereignty, and awaken our souls. You can discover more and walk with us by hopping over to bemythical.com/unio, or you can click the link in the description. And now back to this week's episode. Let's dive in. Hello, Kathleen. A huge welcome back.
Hi there, Leanne. It's great to be back.
Yes, here we are again. And this, as we were saying just before we started recording, this idea of having a daily spiritual practice feels so timely, so important. One of the things that perhaps is both a kind of symptom and a cause of where we find ourselves in this modern lifestyle. And so, yes, I'm really happy we're having this conversation. But let's begin with, and we both agree, kind of defining things. Even sometimes, even the most obvious things are the things that
Yeah,
most could benefit from defining.
indeed.
What do you mean by this idea of spiritual practice, and particularly even daily spiritual practice? What's that mean to you?
Sure. Well, I mean, we expect to get up every day and we expect to have food. We expect to comb our hair or bathe or shower or whatever it is, all those things. But what does the soul do? Yes. And I think that, the soul also needs care. And a spiritual practice is an essential care of the soul so that the body, which is the vehicle of the soul, and the soul can get on well together and work in concert. Because I think, we're seeing throughout the world more and more that the body's doing one thing and the soul's just kind of going, what do I do now? What do I do now?
Mm,
Yeah. So if we kind of bring things together at the beginning of the day and check in during the day, so that we're reconnecting with the larger world, or what people used to call the macrocosm. So the microcosm, we know about it. We live in the everyday world. That's where we are. But that larger world we also belong to. So we are beings among many other beings who inhabit this world and this larger reality that in shamanism we call the other world. So
mm,
how do we align ourselves so that sort of infinitesimal, which for us can become a very big gap if we leave it out, how we sort of narrow that gap. So that again, the fabric of the universe is not just what we see on the outside; it's also the internal fabric as well that is
mm.
together, and that we're the joining of those two sides of reality make one reality. They're not separate realities. we think of them as such, but they are interwoven, and it's that, how can we
Mm.
be interwoven every day?
That's such a great way of saying it. I always appreciate your way of using metaphor and analogy in the way that you do. I think it really helps make these things that can seem complex or hard to understand in that kind of everyday human way. You've got a real gift for making these things clear and simple. So just appreciating that about you. So you mentioned body and soul. Where would you say mind fits into that, the human mind?
I think the mind is the sort of the toggling together part of it, isn't it? Because, we can be a bundle of passions and desires, and ambitions, but the mind is the controller, the one that receives, the wisdom, and then finds ways of coordinating that with the body. So I
Mm,
think those are really important, control. I mean, within my own tradition, we talk about the three cauldrons, which is, um, the three cauldrons, are sort of the vessels of soul, and they're seen to be in the belly, in this sort of middle part of the body, and sort of including the head. And,
mm,
the connection between those three is very subtle, and there's a very important 16th century Irish text which I've translated, which talks about these. But um, each one of those cauldrons has its own light.
mhm,
In the Irish tradition, there's a triad, which is a sort of a encapsulation of wisdom, which says that, um, there are three candles that, illuminate every darkness, and they are truth, nature, and knowledge. And so that lower cauldron
mm,
is kind of like, nature, the world in which we live. It's called the cauldron of warming. It's our life. It's the vessel of our actual physical life. Um, but this sort of middle cauldron is a different case. It has, it's called in Irish, it's called the Cuire Erenme, which translates as the cauldron of vocation. It is not a very easily translatable term, but it's like the cauldron of our gifts and how we respond to those gifts and how we give them to the world. And also, it's a cauldron that can be overturned by emotion.
mm,
Um, but it has sort of an ancestral quality to it then. And that upper cauldron is one of knowledge, which is the knowledge of that greater world again, which is also part of us. And the calibration of those cauldrons is a sort of an everyday thing for some people. But it
mm,
needn't be that complicated. It can be much more simple, even if we just looked at the words truth, nature, and knowledge, because the
mhm,
world around us, we have to live by our guiding principle, which again is part of our mind and our soul. Um, so how do we respond to the world? Do we respond with truth? Do we try and deceive? What is it we're doing? And then that greater knowledge, which we're trying to always be in contact with. So I think these are pretty basic things for us all to look at. But I think the
mm,
problem now is, spiritual practice is seen as something that only beginners do.
mm.
Yes, and as a friend of mine, R.J. Stewart says, "There is no advance, there's only practice."
Oh, I love that. I really do. um, One of the things that was occurring to me as you were talking is, at least in the way that I define it, spiritual practice can both be something that we do on a like daily basis, let's say, and maybe if we were watching from the outside, we might describe it as a ritual. That
Mhm.
could
Yeah.
involve, I don't know, lighting a candle every day,
Mhm.
praying, making
Mm.
offerings, these things that kind of have this ritual nature to them,
Yes.
however elaborate or simple. But there's also the ways that we can move throughout our day as a
Yeah.
spiritual practice,
Yes.
which have also two aspects to them. The way that we work in the academy that I teach in is we kind of we talk about this as in ritual in the way that we just spoke about, but then also sort of daily practice that just happens in those everyday interactions, in
Yes.
conversations, in the choices that we make, but then also in contemplation when we it doesn't necessarily mean withdrawing to the world. We can contemplate as we walk, let's say, but be in
Exactly.
this kind of contemplation of ourselves, our soul, the world. Um, and I think all three of those different ways of being in
Mm.
practice are things that we have lost contact with to a large extent in this modern world. But for me, are kind of like what we could describe as spiritual practice. So there's a kind of two follow-up questions to that. Would you agree? Would you define spiritual practice in a similar way to how I've just described? It can be kind of both that sort of ritual-like nature, but also other ways. And what do you see are the consequences of us not having those orientating kinds of practices in our lives in the way, again, many of us don't in this modern world?
Yeah. Wow, those are two big questions. So yes, spiritual practice can take all kinds of different forms. Which again, people looking at it from the outside will say, "Oh, yeah, that's a ritual." Um, but the prayer, and in my case, the singing, so I wouldn't be able to have any spiritual practice without song. Um, as I suppose that no one who plays a guitar could have spiritual practice without their guitar,
Mm,
or their dog if they walk their dog. So there are companions to this as well. Um, but those daily connection points are the things that keep us together, and the lack of doing them um, is now everywhere. I mean, I have a client practice, so I'm seeing shamanic, clients for shamanic healing all the time, and I mean, and just in everyday courses and things like that, and in everyday life, I'm just seeing so many people now who are porous. They're like a china cup that hasn't had a glaze. So you pour
mm,
you pour boiling water in, and it all just kinds of comes out the cracks. Um, and with the increased anxiety that there is in the world, there is no resilience. There is no belonging. There's no rootedness. There's a lack of groundedness, and you know we can we can see all over the place that when people just go back into just this side of reality, um, the resources that they might. I mean, I was just talking to someone yesterday, and um, she's someone who's European who's gone back to the USA, and of course she's on the West Coast, so where all the rioting and the crackdown is there. And she was saying to me, "But I can't even swim in the sea because the wildfires have been, all the debris and the dirt that's caused has gone into the sea, and so people are warned
gosh.
not
Mm,
to even go into the sea." So there are the strange exigencies of everyday life in different parts of the world. I think these are the things that drive us more and more into fear and into a lack of resourcefulness.
mhm,
To not have a spiritual resource with you, it is like going out into the rain without a raincoat.
mhm.
On one level.
Yes, gosh. The way you just said that, not to have a spiritual resource with you. We're so focused, again, with there is a kind of vicious circle here in that the less we have that spiritual resource, the more we focus on material resources.
Exactly.
What's going to keep me safe? And again, that's not to dismiss
Mm.
them. We do need things that are going to,
Well, yeah,
feed us, keep us
exactly.
safe.
Yeah.
But with the lack of understanding of how important that spiritual resource is, we become even more focused and even more fearful on how much of those primal material resources we need, which then mean that we're becoming even less connected to that spiritual resource. It's that word, I think, really puts that
Yeah.
into sharp relief.
But I think it's not just people who do spiritual things that need this. I mean, we see it at a level of, why do children need to take knives into school?
Mm,
That there's a lack of some spiritual resource in our community, because yes, there have always been school bullies. Let's be clear. That's, they've always been there. Um, you know, Older children who will exert their authority in very mean and horrible ways. But there is something really seriously wrong when children need to take knives into school as the resource that will protect them.
mm,
You know, so from that sort of level, through to the person just muddling through their daily life, who's got various problems going on, which may be work related or family related, whatever. Um, and this is the thing that is very worrisome because, when we when we have these challenges around us, um, we need more spiritual practice, not less.
yes.
And it's really hard for people to
Mm.
begin a spiritual practice when they're in these times of sort of panic.
Yes,
Um,
yes, it
mm,
seems like the last thing to focus on, and yet it's when it's most important. So what you've just said there about the example of schools brings me to a question I was pondering, which is, how do you see that our own personal spiritual practice might in some way impact, influence, benefit the collective?
mm. But I think that's always the case that I mean, let's take Glastonbury as a case in point. Now we all know Glastonbury has extraordinary landscape and extraordinary myths and legends, and it once had a huge abbey where people prayed all the time, from very early times through to the Reformation, and then this enormous abbey was completely destroyed, and so a lot of other spiritual practices are going on at Glastonbury, but there's not a lot of stability in it.
Hmm.
So it's just like it's a spiritual place that where the prayer has not been continuous there, and continuous prayer sort of makes things stable. And so you get to the bottom of Glastonbury High Street and you see it happening to people. They just completely go off the rails, or behave aberrantly. And it's like everything sort of slushes to the bottom of the High Street. And
Mm.
there's not that sort of there's not that sort of powerful prayer that's a continuous ongoingness. And I think that when you live near to something like that, that you're aware of that, both the need for that stability and the instability that's all around you. Just taking that as a random, because I mean, Glastonbury is considered to be this holiest earth, in ancient legend. And at one level it is, and at another level it's kind of disorderly because there's not a lot of coordination um, in spiritual effort then. I think spiritual belonging brings with it, in the same way that, um, that I think of sort of the legends of the Grail, where, knights go on quest for the Grail, which is sort of to restore things as they were, to bring back the waters. We were talking earlier on about, our current drought.
Mhm.
um, when the waters dry up, whether it's physically or in our soul, people need to go on quest. And they do a lot of wandering about and meeting odd and strange things and having all sorts of encounters. And they occasionally come across, in a clearing, there'll be a hermit who says, "That dream that you just had, I can tell you all about the dream you've just had. Explain it to you." Um, so it's like everywhere, even in the sort of the most sort of spiritually redundant places, if I can, call them that if there is someone who is holding integrity and they're like a little beacon in that area that is having effect upon the land can remember what it is, and the people around them can remember who they are. and there is an opening and an enlightenment in the sense of it's not all dark and dreadful
Mm.
that's going on. So I think yes, that these things are important, but I'm just thinking also about this very subtle this world other world thing, which I think is another problem here. I was talking this week to a chaplain from the US, and he was telling me a story about meeting up with some trainee chaplains, and he was teaching them and talking about the various things that chaplains need to do, and then someone put up their hand and said, um, "You're talking about this as if it's all real." Meaning the spiritual world. And I sort of said at that point, it might be, it would be like, maybe you have chosen the wrong profession. Um, but I think that I don't think this is all real going on, which stops people engaging with spiritual
Yes.
practice, which I think is and of course we're going back to the wound of not having your own tradition. If
Yes.
whatever your
Mm.
tradition is, whether you're, one of the big five religions or a bunch of people who go and worship a tree, which of course in Hinduism would be regarded that you would just be a Hindu. Yes, that's
Mm.
not considered to be a strange thing to do that. But whatever it is that you hold holy or sacred, um, Um, and if you're not one of those, if you don't fit into one of those official boxes, um, then what are you? You're not authorized. Is what people very often think. I'm not authorized, and I hear these words so often. Um, but I don't know how to do that properly.
Mm.
So
Yeah.
properly means no one showed me how to do this. But,
Mm.
and often you find people who've discovered their own spiritual way, they're doing their own spiritual practice, and at the same time, they will diss it. They will say,
Mm.
"I'm not really authorized to do this," whereas in fact, you know, the world has shown you this, well,
Yeah, or
do
your
it.
own soul, or
Yeah,
yes, one way or another, we are called
exactly.
back over and over. So there's, gosh, there's about 5 different,
I know.
places I want to go from
Opens a
here.
lot of
So,
windows, yeah.
um, so the first is a maybe a slight dichotomy in what I was hearing in what you were just sharing. This isn't saying you were contradicting yourself, but I think this is a kind of, part of the challenge that in the example you gave of Glastonbury, um, we've got all of these kind of, different practices and
Yeah,
beliefs, and it's kind of, it doesn't have that cohesion. And I was comparing it as I was listening you talk. At the moment, my shamanic teacher is a traditional Mongolian
yeah,
shaman, which comes from, many thousands of years, unbroken
yeah,
lineage. So it has that cohesion of
yes,
rituals and prayers and beliefs and cosmology. And as you were saying, that's no longer the case in what was once this kind of cohesive spiritual center
yes,
like Glastonbury. And yeah, you also gave the example of both that hermit, where they're, one person with that kind of true spiritual practice, being in integrity, um, can be this light in
yes,
the dark. And then also, as you were saying at the end, someone finding their way. In fact, that's very much an aspect of my own story, kind of finding my way literally to a tree and recognizing
yes,
what was there that our culture hadn't told
yes,
me. We can wake up to these things seemingly spontaneously as well, which is completely outside of a teaching and lineage, as
yes.
it seems to us at least. Um so what's your sense as to kind of what's the way for us, for those of us that aren't currently in a traditional lineage, but are feeling this call to a spiritual practice? What's your sense of navigating that? As you say, we look at somewhere like Glastonbury and you can feel there is this kind of, chaotic nature where things aren't coming from a cohesive place, from a lineage. And yet on the other hand, for many of us, that's kind of like the best
Mm.
we've got, it's a
Yeah.
starting point. But I'd love to hear your sense.
Well, just to go back briefly to Glastonbury, I should have sort of also said at the same time that, that places that have very strong energy and need sort of a bit of spiritual, guardianship going on there in terms of that cohesion, that things come to sacred
Mhm.
places that have, been slightly off piste because they're not fulfilling what they used to do. Whether it was druids who were there before or whatever you want to call them. Um, but there's something that when something's kind of slightly off true, it begins to warp things. And so very often I think of
Mm.
very sacred
Because of the
places.
power of that
It's
place.
so powerful that it
Yeah.
acts like a
Mm.
burning glass, and
Yeah.
so I've seen it very many times that, people come with, "Oh, we're moving to Glastonbury," and my heart sinks because I know that there are family problems or that, one of the
Mm.
children is, slightly on the spectrum or whatever it is, and I'm gonna think, "Well, how is that going to play out?" Because
'Cause
it
it'll be
tends to
amplified.
accentuate,
Mm.
so very happy people become maniacally happy, slightly depressed people become very depressed, and so that sort of intensification of things. I mean, I dare say it would be the same if we went to several other places that were a
Mm.
little bit chaotic in that respect. But I think it's the everydayness of every day that we need to work with, and um, that's not difficult material. In fact, it's spurned because it's very ordinary.
Mhm.
But I'm sort of thinking back to, currently on Substack, I'm sort of writing a course called the Golden Verses course, which is based upon the teachings of Pythagoras as an everyday, the Pythagorean sort of lifestyle and how to keep in harmony with the universe. Now that's been going on for 25 centuries, which is quite a long time. And one of the practices that they did was the salutations of the sun, which was like you got up in the morning, you saluted the sun. You see it in the symposium. Um, Plato is in the porch and he's thinking in the porch all night, and people think, is he still there? And it's like, and then the sun comes up and he venerates the sun. So it's a very common practice in the Greek world. Um, so you do it at sort of the beginning of the day when you get up. Um, and again, when you stop at midday, you salute the sun again at midday. You do it when you come home because the sun is going to the west. You're going back to your home unless you're on night shift. And then when we go to sleep, when we lie down before we start going to sleep, we do it again. So the sun for us in our hemisphere is at rest when it's night. So just even those four places of just touching into whatever's sacred to you is really good thing. So we've got that daily round,
Mm.
we've got the monthly round of the moon, if you're more into moon things. And then we've got the yearly cycle of the sun, which of course gives us all our seasons and all those things. So we've got these three very natural cycles already going on, which we are living out. Um, so calibrating those within religious calendars has always been a very great challenge because the year doesn't come round in a tidy exactly 365 point whatever it is
Mm.
days, and we have to have these extra days to make things up. But so I think that's a good place to start. And I think another
Mm.
good place to start is where we're living. You
Mhm.
get up in the morning and it's like, where is the wind blowing from this morning? This is this. I know people will see this as this strange British preoccupation with weather. Actually, actually when you're on an island, where the weather comes from is very much about how we are today. And when we
Mm.
talk about the weather, we're saying how we are. Um,
Mhm.
you know so that sort of that daily noticing of what the weather is, how am I today, I'm feeling pretty grumpy, whatever it is. But now I'm going to sort of come into sort of one place with where I'm living. So it's a nice way of sorting those things out. But this is a very elderly metaphor, so I have to apologize to those that weren't living in these times, but analog television used to have horizontal and vertical hold, meaning if the television wasn't if the screen went round like this, you'd have to adjust the which of the holes would, and there was if it was going zzz from side to side, you would adjust the button, and you adjusted the horizontal and vertical hold. And I think for me, those are also it's an important metaphor. It creates this, which is
Mm.
the land we're on, the ancestors I come from. So, and that works wherever you are in the world. So if your family have emigrated to Australia, or you're currently living in Burma as part of an embassy or whatever you're doing, um, or you're traveling, you can always do that. You're always in touch with your ancestral traditions and still with the land that you're on where you are. And
Mm.
I think those are two very nice ways of starting a spiritual
Yes.
practice.
You read my mind because I was about to say to you, thinking about the conversation that you brought up that we were having earlier about the lack of water in our gardens
Yes.
and
Yes.
the way these, the more that we have, and it doesn't necessarily have to be tied to the cycles of the land and the
Mhm.
seasons, moon and sun. But I think that it's a kind of helpful way to almost like hook on to something that's already happening.
Yes.
But it's fascinating to me the way that it changes it changes our perception of so much. It changes our perception of time even and our understanding of kind of, oh, this time, just a simple example where we were talking about, I look back at photos of this time in previous years and I'm like,
Yes.
oh, the grass wasn't as dried up and yellow looking this time in previous years. And that's kind of a metaphor for what I notice we start to realize about ourselves. It's like it gives us this sort of positioning in time where we can kind of go, oh, this time last full moon, this was happening for me. This is what I was being called to.
Yes.
This time, whether it be midsummer, this was happening for me at this kind of soulful level. I'd love to hear your sense of that because I think this is
Yeah.
again something that we're
Yeah.
really um it's kind of building on this idea. I think this is a really good sort of
Yeah.
starting point for people
Indeed.
looking for a spiritual practice.
Yeah.
But what have you observed kind of comes downstream the more that and as you say, this is part of our ancestral heritage,
Yeah.
isn't it? Across the
Mm.
world, all of our
Exactly.
ancestors worked with these cycles.
Exactly.
What do you see happens as we start to align more with them and see that kind of
Mm.
deeper the going back to the topic here, daily spiritual
Yes.
practice, what unfolds from that daily spiritual practice built into or built upon those cycles?
But I think that, just say one of the very first things that if you keep any kind of journal about how you're doing or what you've realized, and if you look back through your journal and look, say, 5 years back from when you've just recorded some marvelous revelation that you've just had, it's quite humiliating to notice that you just discovered it 5 years ago again. S and sometimes, it's like, human beings, remember and forget, and sometimes we're in alignment with something, and sometimes the season reminds us that we need things. Like, "Look, where did I
Mm.
put my swimming costume? I've no idea where it is, I've not done any swimming for a while," and so on. But I sort of think, that what we're also talking about is time and timelessness
Mm.
here, that yes, the year goes round in a circle, but actually our life experience, we're actually going round in a spiral. So we come round, say, Christmas or New Year or whatever, on the different parts that which actually resonate with different times of our understanding. Um, and I think some things things change. I think, the spiritual practice changes and evolves over time. And so there are some things maybe we did 7 years ago that now are not so helpful to us, or we learnt something from someone else or from a different tradition. which we thought would be quite helpful as a little sort of like a scaffolding for what we're doing.
Mm.
But then you discovered something else. So I think that there are the subtle changes in your practice. Um, but if you continue doing your practice, whatever it is, on some days you'll have more time for it than other days, of course. Um, there comes to be a consistency that you just drop into it. So a lot of people think, I haven't got time to do a half-hour meditation, or whatever they do. And it's like, yeah, no, a lot of us don't. That's not what we can do. But many years ago, I passed by a church that was having a series of talks, and it made me laugh at the time because it was quite amusingly written, but it was a minimum belief, a series of 6 talks on Christianity. And I sort of laughed my head off. But then actually, I've often thought back to that notice since, because what is our minimum? What is our minimum
Mm.
practice? What is what is it that, we know it's like, what are the essential vitamins that we need? And also, what is our contribution to the world? Because we're not just here to gimme, gimme, gimme. Getting cups of sugar from the other world is not what we're doing, is it?
Mm.
So I think that sense of uh, there's a maturity and a stability which comes to the whole of our living, which shows itself. I mean, people notice that, that we're not yay sayers to this and that we don't like it when certain things happen, that we refuse to go and do something because of our principles, for example. Uh, and we're not just kind of yay sayers to whatever's going at the moment, whatever
Mm.
the fashionable thing to do is. So our practice is changing and also stabilizing our own life all the time, which of course does have effect elsewhere. So, it's not quantifiable on one level. Yes, people would say, well, show me evidence of what happens from your spiritual practice. And you couldn't do that unless you were someone who was following someone for years and years.
Mm.
Yes. Like those studies they did with children in the last millennium, following children from their birth through to 40s, 50s, and 60s. Um,
Mm.
they didn't look at what changed, but actually um, what it is that we spiritually belong to always calls us home. I think that's
Yes.
that's the thing.
Mm.
That's the one of the greatest
Mm.
inspirations of this, isn't it? So whether it be a particular tradition or inspiration, that holds it for us. But when we're outside a tradition, it's quite difficult to get those just the basic practices um, sorted out, because things like the work of prayer, for example, is not quantifiable.
Mm.
But a lot of people sort of say, "Oh, I don't do prayer," just like because it's to do with some other tradition. It's like, well, no, it's our heritage too. And
Mm. I
so,
don't know if there is a heritage without prayer, actually. That's,
no, I mean, absolutely.
I'm not aware of one.
No, no, I know, but it's
Mm.
like, but people's perception is that because the big five do prayer, then
Mm.
obviously it must belong to them because we don't do
Yes.
that. Um,
I
but
certainly felt that way once upon a time. It was, yeah,
yeah,
I think it's got so associated to organized religion, we forget that this is actually in
yeah,
our blood and bones as
exactly.
much as any other thing. Mm.
And so I actually sort of came up with something for my students, because so many of them would sort of say, because I actually say to people, if you're not prepared to pray beyond a certain point in this, in the teaching, it's like, I don't want you in the room,
Mm.
because it's like we can't go on together. It's like the trainee chaplain who says, "You're behaving as if all this is real," you know? And it's like, yeah, if it's not real for you, it's just let's just stop here,
Yeah.
let's not do this. So I came up with this little aid memoir, which is just it's just a little jingle to remember what our prayer responsibility is, and it's just a little 5-liner. It's very simple for people to remember, and it's like, We pray for those who can no more. We pray with those who can restore. We pray from those who hold the door. We gift our prayer to those unsure, and we pray to those who I endure, meaning forever, endure forever. So I'll just break that down. So it's like all of us should be praying for those who are absolutely at the limits of their endurance and don't know where to turn because they need extra help. So our job is not to prescribe what the help is, but it is to remember them before all those powers that we we belong with, and say, look, they can't do it anymore. Give them the help they need. Um, I like praying with prepositions. I think it's very important because people nearly always say, "So, what do you pray to?" And it's like, well, we're doing other prepositions here. So we pray for those who can no more. We pray with those who can restore. So we align ourselves with those because we don't know what people need. We don't know what the Rift Valley needs. We don't know what, the Straits of Hormuz need right now. We pray with those who can restore whatever it
Mm.
is that's need. And then we pray from those who hold the door, because very often there are people and situations in the world that are perilously near, um, you know, stepping off into something they don't understand, or very purposefully about to perpetrate something that's going to change everything for their people. And so those that hold the door, those powers that hold the door, are really important because they give a boundary to those things that should not be overgone, and they also shepherd back those that are going too far, wherever it is. And I like we gift our prayer to those unsure because I think that every day there should be a free prayer for whoever it is that needs it. And it may be that they need it now, it may be they needed it sometime when, and it may be they will need it. But to my mind, this is like the little mountain shelter where any climbers who go up, that there's this little hut. It always has essential things. If you go to Switzerland or wherever, they always have like a box of matches, some firewood, some tins of food, so that if you get benighted in the drifts, you've got some means of continuing.
Mm.
And I'll tell a story about this afterwards. So that last one, we pray to those who I endure. We pray to those whom we understand, those spiritual beings whom we understand, um,
Mm.
as far as we can understand them.
Yes.
If you see what I mean. But I had a lovely example of we gift our prayer to those unsure. I was doing a conference once, and there were two very Orthodox Jewish ladies who were actually playing hooky. They should have been somewhere else, but they'd come to this conference and they astounded us all and were very sweet. And they stood on stage and they said, "We want to thank the people of Britain." And we kind of thought, why? We had no idea what they were talking about. And it turned out they were both descendants of people who had been brought to Britain on the Kinder transport. Yeah. And so obviously their sheer existence was down to, some people in Britain paid the £50 bond that brought one child on a train to Britain and to be looked after during the war. So they were very lovely. Anyway, to cut a long story short, I did a session on the ancestors at this conference, and afterwards, two of them raced up to me because I did a meditation afterwards, and they raced up to me and said, "We want to talk to you because we both saw something." So we went outside and sat under a tree, and I said, "What is it you both saw?" And he said, "We both saw the same thing. It was like we were at the back of some older block of flats, and we saw people being put into vans and driven away in this terrible sorrow." And I looked at them and they looked at me and I said, "Well, I think you know what that is." And they said, "We have an idea, but we just want you to say." And I said, "I think these were people who were rounded up when Jews were being rounded up. It happened in the sight of nobody. Nobody saw those people go, and so it's like they they have now shown themselves to you, and so
Mm.
now we've witnessed them. So we just burst into tears and just held
Mm.
hands for about the next sort of 10 minutes because we couldn't do anything else. But it that's exactly what it felt like to them.
Yeah. Gosh,
So we never know
such a
we never
potent
know
example.
when or where our prayer may go or when it may go, and I think that's a
Yeah.
really important thing to remember that, um, that I offered the other day to put someone I have a shrine, I put people on the shrine. I don't do anything except put them there. I inscribe their names, and if there's a particular problem, I might say what that is, but I just leave it on the shrine. And, and the woman said, "Oh, no, no, I don't want my mother to be prayed for." And I said, "Well, no, I'm not going to pray that anything should happen to her one way or the other. I'm just putting her in witness, in spiritual witness, because I don't know what she needs. And to pray for someone who's unwell, as it was in this case, may be a curse because,
Mm.
for someone to get better may be a curse because it may be that they're dying, and we shouldn't be praying for their increased and improved health if that's the case, because that would be an awful thing to do. So, um, so I think prayer responsibilities are on all of us.
Mm.
I don't know what
Gosh.
you would say. I mean, please,
Mm.
you know, this is um, a part of it, because the more we're a part of it, um, the more we're together.
Yeah. Absolutely. Gosh, there's two we're kind of out of time, but there's two questions that I really want to, maybe there's three actually.
That's fine.
If we can quickly go here because
Yeah.
they feel important. Um so the first is one to you personally, talking about this idea of kind of like minimum belief, minimum practice. If you were to kind of let go of all of the different things that you've been taught, you believe, um you've written, all the different ways that you practice spiritually, and you had to kind of go, okay, this is going to be my absolute kind of minimum daily spiritual practice, what would that be?
There'll be breathing and singing probably.
Mm.
Um, yeah. Um, the three quadrants practice is very important to me, I have to say. That's something that I always go to bed with every night. So it's like may those three candles illuminate every darkness you know, um, is that prayer. But our relationship with truth, nature, and knowledge is the absolute minimum for me.
Mm. Thank you. And then again, this is not a quick answer at all,
Do
but
my
it
best.
feels we've touched on this, and so it
Mm,
feels an important one. So going back to what you were talking about, that kind of axes of the
mm.
ancestors and the land, and I've been pondering the essential role of the land in our spiritual practice. Um, a lot recently, where the reason for this pondering, and I'll give the reason for it because it might help illuminate what I'm asking. So I'm in the midst of preparing to teach a course on the menstrual cycle, and the way that I've learned and taught this before is through four archetypes. So the four kind of phases of the menstrual cycle,
Yeah.
teach them through archetypes. And then what's been really occurring to me is how in any myth, the archetypes are kind of embedded in the myth, and the myth is embedded in the land. Like these
Mm.
things aren't
Yes. Yeah.
separate.
Yeah.
We can think they are, we can try and kind of pull them up by their roots, but they don't really make sense without that context. And so I've been pondering this and pondering kind of like, where's the landscape one would meet, like let's say for example one of the archetypes is the wild woman. Where would the wild woman be found? What's her landscape? And then also if you're a particular person working with that particular archetype, where is that landscape on your land? And so this is the reason I've been really pondering the way
Mm,
that in our
mm,
modern culture, we've kind of tried to pull these things up from the roots. And
yeah,
actually, more and more, I see that
yeah.
that just doesn't work. It needs to be in the land we're on.
No,
So,
potted
mm,
archetypes don't work.
yes, potted, another way of saying
No,
it.
they are because they
Mm,
their roots are not in,
mm.
interfacing with the
In
rest
the
of the earth.
real wild soil, yes.
And this is
So
the
let me just
problem.
ask you the question because I
Yeah,
appreciate again we're out of time, and but you
yeah,
felt such an important one. I guess simply put, what's your sense as to kind of the importance of our spiritual practice being connected, embedded,
yeah,
rooted in our
yeah,
land?
yeah. I once had a conversation with John Borman, and we were talking about exactly this, and his observation was, um, Christianity is the imposition of a desert religion upon a forest people. Which I thought was
Oof.
just an incredibly observant. But it is
Mm,
true that all beliefs and traditions are rooted in the soil of where we live, um, in the weather patterns that we have, in all the things that to do with the land. And if we went back ancestrally, of course, people would have been interfacing with an Arctic landscape, which is not what we have now. So obviously, our spiritual practice and understandings have changed as the land came out of the ice. So yes, I think those things are absolutely essential, and we can't pot the myths. They belong in the landscape. Myth and landscape belong together, and from those, as you say, the archetypes arise. But they're not just all in Jung.
mm,
They are absolutely within the land,
mm,
and even within the land of Britain, that would be many different kinds of landscapes, and so we can tell
yes.
the nature of, say, Cornwall is very different from, say, Aberdeen. They're both on granite. The soil type's really important. It makes the nature of the people very hardy on
Mm,
granite, but there's an endurance in granite, which is very
mm,
different from, say, the shale and gravel of the Thames estuary or whatever,
yeah.
so that even around the country there will be different ways of seeing and understanding.
Mm.
And whether you're a hill person or a mountain person or a coastal person, all of those things tell you different things.
Mm. And I guess that goes back to what you were saying about, the ancestors and the land. There is the land aspect of our ancestors, and then there's
Mhm.
the land, not everyone's living on the land of their ancestors.
No.
But either way, the land of both needs to be taken into account. It
Yes.
increasingly seems to
Yeah.
me.
Exactly. I
Mm,
think so. Yeah. It's the way to go.
mm.
It's the local be local.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes, absolutely. In fact, one very quick final question talking about myths. If you were here to, which I believe you are, live out your own soul's myth, what archetype, what myth would that be? And I know that
Ah,
you've got, extensive
right.
understanding of
Okay. No,
myths.
no. No. This is where we have to be very careful
Okay.
because there are certain myths that are very attractive to us, but our job is not to live them out. The Joseph
Mm,
Campbell thing is very, very dangerous because Joseph Campbell took myth to be personal.
mm,
Mm-mm. Myth is community. It's not personal. Yeah. And I've seen a lot of people live out a myth and they're not actually human beings anymore.
mm,
Becoming the archetype is not the thing. Mediating the archetype, that's different. Being in service to a stream of understanding whereby all that is good and true within that comes out. But there are some very chaotic archetypes as well we don't want to be doing. And people who take that as a kind of a fated thing that they must behave like the Morrigan or they must behave like someone else is like, no, that's like mediate it, Don't live it. We're human beings.
Mm,
It's part of, I think, Joseph Campbell's idea and this psychological idea that we can just apply myths directly to people is like putting, molten lead on people or
mm.
expecting them to take a confection of something that's quite poisonous. Like here's a cup of ivy for you.
Yes.
No, no. This
Mm.
is, we're human beings. While we resonate to particular myths and traditions, we must also be careful not to live them
But a
because,
real
yeah, I've seen
cautionary
this.
tale right there. Yes.
I've
So
seen this.
differently said, and I really agree with you. Again, going back to what I was saying earlier, I completely, in fact, I recorded an episode a couple of weeks ago talking about this. Myths in themselves are ultimately communal, and are
Mm,
showing us how to live in
yes,
relationship with
exactly.
the land, the community around us. And yet, as you're saying, there definitely is archetypes and stories that have this kind of particular meaning to us, this particular
Oh, yeah,
call to
yeah, yeah.
us.
I mean,
Um,
I'm the teller of stories and the singer of songs, of all the patient wife stories. Yeah,
mhm,
that's kind of. But as a younger woman, I was near that. I was very near that, stepping into that to live it, which is like, no, not living
mm.
that. That is not my personal myth.
Mm,
No, that is has been both a support and it could have been a curse as
mhm,
well. But yes, so the myths of Rhiannon, the Haggerty Nag, all of those stories, the horse that knows how to get out of the enchanted castle, all of those stories, those are all the stories. Or the sort of the myths of the horse-headed Demeter of Phalaris, and so those. Yeah, I know those. I know those very strongly, and I also know that I must not live them.
mm.
But I know that
Yes.
I'm out there for all those people
Mm,
that that resonate on that. So I know from a point of expert understanding, as they say, which I think we all do. But the people who fulfill the myth absolutely in their lives can become psychotic. They can
mm,
become very unbalanced, and it takes them out of accord with their everyday life.
yes. So,
Which is a
where
cautionary
can
point to end this, but
yes, no, I'm really
so
glad. I'm really glad. We may need to come
yeah, no,
back
of
and
course, this is a whole other
continue this
discussion.
conversation.
Yeah,
Yes, it really is. It really
yeah.
is. But I'm very happy. We don't all. I do love a happy ending, but we don't
Oh, I
always
know,
have
but, sometimes it's like,
to.
it's not our responsibility
Mm,
to enact those great things. Um, but I mean, these are the mysteries, aren't they? This is, maybe this is another conversation for another
mhm.
time, that the great mysteries in with a capital M, of the traditions are, they're huge. They're nationwide stories, and there's a whole other thing that lies there. Um, and they sometimes guide countries well and peoples well, and sometimes the spectre of those can take over. So it's
Yes.
exactly the same for countries and people, as it is for land masses. So yeah.
Yeah. It's I think we do need to come back and do an episode on
We'll
that.
we'll go there. We'll go there.
Yes. For now, where can listeners find out more about you and the wonderful work you do?
Yeah, so they can have a look at my Substack page, which is called Caitlín Matthews dash Hallow Quest, HALLOW Quest, all one word, Sanctuary, where I'm writing every week. So you can see me there. My website is HallowQuest, the same, .org.uk.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much. This has been, as ever, such a delight, and we've gone to some quite
Yeah,
unexpected places.
huge places. Yeah.
But thank you.
Thank you, Leanne.
What a wonderful show. Here are my favorite parts. Simple daily gestures of attention to our body, the land, the weather, and our soul can shift spiritual practice from a guilty obligation into a steady resource that restores our resilience and prevents that porous, unglazed feeling that so many people live with. Kathleen's way of praying for, with, from, and to reframe spiritual responsibility dissolves that fear of doing it wrong and widens the field of relationship by recognizing that prayer isn't a performance, it's a participation. Rooting archetypes, myths, and personal practice in the actual soil, seasons, and place brings the stories alive, steadies our inner lives, and keeps us in service to the myth rather than being swallowed up by it. If you'd like to hop on over to the show notes for the links, they're at bemythical.com/podcast/529. And as you heard me say earlier, if you're struggling with the challenges of walking your soul path in this crazy modern world and would benefit from guidance, kinship, and support, come join us in Unio, the community for wild sovereign souls. You can discover more and join us by hopping over to bemythical.com/Unio now. Let's walk the path home together. And if you don't want to miss out on next week's episode, head on over to your podcasting app or platform of choice, including YouTube, and hit that subscribe or follow button. That way, you'll get each episode delivered straight to your device auto-magically as soon as it's released. Thank you so much for listening. You've been wonderful. I'm sending you all my love. I'll catch you again next week. And until then, go be mythical.